My name is Sonny. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of ABC Florida East Coast. Welcome to episode 23 of the Obvious Podcast.
And I'm Peter Daiga. I'm the President and CEO of Associated Builders and Contractors, Florida East Coast Chapter.
The Obvious Podcast is a production of ABC Florida East Coast. Unless otherwise stated, all content reflects the opinions of the guests and the hosts, which is us.
And if you like the Obvious Podcast, you can subscribe on all the major podcast platforms such as Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, and Spotify, among others, or watch the audio-visual version on YouTube. You can also follow the Obvious Podcast on Instagram, X, and Truth Social. You can always reach out to us via email at theobvious@abceastflorida.com. Links to all the social media feeds are in the episode show notes. And if you want to help others find the podcast, and we hope you do, please leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice.
How are you, Peter?
I'm terrific. Doing great.
So
I'm enjoying watching the news again.
Yeah. So you know how when we have a new team member start at ABC, we always say, hey, get ready, your first 6 months is going to be drinking water out of a fire hose. That's what the news has been like the last few weeks, and it's been just coming at you.
Spectacular.
You know, I have a vision of Keanu Reeves from The Matrix where he's kind of bent over and the bullets are whizzing over him, right? And I feel like that's the liberals, and here comes the executive order.
And really no surprises. I mean, unless you just never tuned into the campaign or never tuned into any of his rallies. I mean, how refreshing to have somebody that not only is doing what he promised, but doing it in such a fast, orderly fashion. It's almost head spinning, right?
So today I wanted to talk to you about DOGE, right? DOGE has been in the news for the last couple of weeks, big time. And it's coming at you fast and furious. Like I'm seeing my liberal friends having sort of their criticisms just change within hours, right? Like they'll attack one thing. This is anti-democratic. Oh, look how young his engineers are. Oh, look how young
I think it's
his team
spawned
is.
The birth of a new derangement syndrome, DDS. DOGE derangement syndrome. Instead of TDS.
Yeah.
So,
or Elon.
right, it's driving certain people really nuts.
Really nuts.
I don't know if it's DOGE itself or more Elon.
Or Elon Musk.
Yeah, but combination of the two are driving some people crazy.
So I wanted to kind of start this conversation talking about the fact that DOGE is an attack on democracy. I've been hearing that quite a bit.
Oh, spare me.
And I found it interesting, right? Because I think you and I talked about this in the when I graduated undergrad. I was hired. It was a 2-year term. It was meant for people who wanted to go to law school by a major publicly traded bank out of Chicago. And so one of my roles in that job was I was asked to monitor something called the Federal Register every morning, right? Okay. And of course, when I started, I had no idea what the Federal Register was. And I found out that the Federal Register...
Job.
Huh?
That was a thrilling job.
Yeah,
I did that for a period of my life too.
Right
out of college.
Yeah.
I was working for, I think I've mentioned in past podcasts, the Institute for Food and Agricultural Scientists doing grants.
Right.
So you'd scan the Federal Register every day
Every day. And then I had to create a report on things that affected, and this is, every federal agency is pushing out rules every day, and it's like multiple rules from one agency every day, and you're looking at these, trying to figure out if they affect your bank, if they affect your clients, if they affect your industry, if they affect how you do business, your processes. So it's a lot to go through, and then I had to make a report every week that went to the executive.
Fun stuff.
Yeah, fun stuff. But you learn a lot, right? And of course, I had grown up with this, and I think as most of us did. You remember that how a bill becomes a law?
Oh yeah, right? Yeah. What a great.
And that little
people in our generation.
Yep.
And I'm only a bill.
Yeah.
I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill. And I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill.
That's the civics we all initially learned.
So I had always assumed that laws came from Congress, right? And then I'm kind of blown away that, all right, so agencies can just issue rules. And there's no congressional approval. I mean, they would seek public comments, but, unless you're deep in the weeds of a business or of an industry like I was in that role, you're not paying attention. Like, so if you're running a construction company, you're not monitoring the Federal Register to see what affects your industry. There's all these rules that are coming out every day that Congress had nothing to do with. Kind of blew me away, right? And sort of your life goes on and you move on. And now I'm watching DOGE attack that same bureaucracy, the same unelected bureaucracy that Congress never approved. Congress might have approved the agency, but the rules that are being put out every day were not approved by Congress.
Which, by the way, I think for many, many decades, most of my adult life, there was a perception maybe, and the Republicans would campaign on shrinking the size of government.
Yeah.
And the left would always ridicule the right. You know, my whole life, it's like, oh, yeah, Reagan was going to shrink the size of government, but, you know, the deficit went up or bureaucracy grew, right? I mean, they will say there's, and we'd wind up with this, there's really no, hill of beans worth of difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And as it turns out, I mean, there's some truth to that.
There is some truth to that.
But you can't say that now.
You cannot say that now.
You got a guy in there now that, you know, okay, so if our culture, you know, made fun of the fact that there really was no difference and that the politicians that said they wanted to shrink the size of government really were, you know, paper tigers or, you know, whatever. You just, again, we've got somebody now that, to your point, is doing that job. He truly is doing that job. And some people are just losing it, right?
So I'm going to share some data with you, and then I want to come back to the point you were just making about the difference between, let's say, the George Bush, Mitt Romney, John McCain Country Club, Chamber of Commerce Republicans, and Trump, right? The Trump Republicans. But let me get back to the Federal Register. Started in 1936, and its first...
Like so many great things did in the 30s.
in the 30s. Its first volume for the whole year, it contained 2,620 pages of rules. First year.
That was a lot.
1936, yeah.
I don't know.
And then, of course, your federal agencies growing. By the 60s, it's hit 20,000 pages of rules a year.
10 times.
10 times.
Roughly.
Right? 1980, so this is kind of the Jimmy Carter era. You know, Nixon, as we know, grew government like nobody's business. You've hit 87,012 pages for 1980 under the Federal Register, right? And then what changed?
What does that come to a day? Like
Oh
if you were like somebody like you and me in our younger years, how many pages a day were you having to review? 87,000 by 365. I mean, that's like 2,000 a page.
Yeah, it was a lot of pages, right? Yeah.
Hard to keep up with.
I mean, it took a long
Some people
time.
make that point. I mean, you introduced me to a book that Neil Gorsuch, I think, has
Neil
authored,
Gorsuch, Supreme Court
where he
Justice.
talks about the level of, the level of rules and regulations are to the point where nobody really even knows them all.
Yeah.
So anyway, sorry to.
Well, no, he makes, and I know we've talked about this in previous episodes. He makes the point about how the federal agencies can't agree on how many federal agencies there are.
Yeah, they don't even know. How many
There's two different
agencies.
published numbers,
Yeah.
right? Which is, and they're both over 400,
Yeah.
which is
Trump,
insane.
Trump's going to try to help them out. Going to make it a more manageable number
More
to count.
manageable
Number to count,
equation.
hopefully.
But I do want to. So in 1980, the Federal Register published 87,012 pages.
1980?
1980. Reagan comes in. 1986, they published 44,000 pages.
Well, it was a lie in a way that he didn't shrink government. He certainly was shrinking regulations.
He was, he was shrinking.
Fewer regulations, let's put it that way.
Right. Fewer regulations,
Fewer
exactly.
regulations.
And then, fairly consistent in the 90s between the Bushes and the Clintons, around 70,000 pages. Here comes Obama, 2016.
But it's back up during that period.
Yes, from
Bushes
Reagan. Yeah, the Bush.
Reagan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Bushes and the Clintons were indistinguishable. And I think you could argue, frankly, their policy-wise, there's no difference. Here comes Obama, 2016, 97,110 pages.
Wow, this is a new record high.
New record high, right? But now, 2017, here comes Mr. Trump, 61,308 pages. So
Shrunk it by a third.
Shrunk it by a third. And here comes Biden, 2023, back to 80,000 pages. So the idea that one side hates democracy and one side loves democracy doesn't jive with how one side just keeps putting out regulations and rules that have
They're unelected bureaucrats. doing
unelected
these?
bureaucrats.
Oh, okay.
Exactly. These
just
are agencies,
verifying
right? These are agencies.
agencies,
And somehow
appointed bureaucrats
appointed bureaucrats, correct.
by the elected officials. No different than now.
No different than now. Like Elon Musk being appointed.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
But what I'm fascinated by, Elon Musk isn't hiding anything. And this
Exactly.
is like,
That's the difference.
he cuts something, it's within hours, it's on Twitter, not Twitter, it's on X within hours, right? So it's all public knowledge. I mean, the USAID thing came out within hours. They had all these weird things that they were like funding with US taxpayer money.
That's crazy thing.
And you're just sitting there like, wow.
It's hard to imagine, more than 20% or 10% supporting those kind of crazy things. But wow.
Feels like half the country supports
does.
it. And I'm just, I mean, look, it's so silly and Pollyannish to say that the hypocrisy is surprising, because it's not surprising, right? The label, I mean, our media is a joke, right? The fourth estate has absolutely been of no use and has died off, and it's taken on a perspective. But if somebody's openly sharing with you the rules, the negative, or not negative, but you know what I mean, the things that aren't in the best interest of the American
Right.
taxpayer, and they're saying, hey, we're changing this, and you're turning around and calling them a fascist, and you're calling them a Nazi.
Look, it's so obvious. I think it's only that legacy media or lamestream media or whatever you want to call them that kind of keep even the concept alive. That somehow it's undemocratic or right. I mean, it's
And think
everybody
about how
knows.
much- and think about how much they hid under Biden, right? I mean, forget Biden's mental acuity and all of those issues, but they were,
I was thinking about that when you were talking about the pages. I mean, that's the published stuff.
that's the published stuff.
I mean, God knows what they were doing that they didn't publish. So,
right.
but yeah, I mean, I think everybody understands, how runaway this government is. The way, some people are saying they don't even know where all the money went. That's been in the news recently.
Yeah.
Some of the money that went to Ukraine, all of a sudden, they're claiming they didn't even receive it all.
60 Minutes did an episode where they were in Ukraine, and these Ukrainians are talking about how American taxpayer funding was supporting classes on knitting or something, I think it was. And the next day, and 60 Minutes thought it was a great thing, and they like put it on the air, like they were very proud of it. And then the next day, people were like, "This is where U.S." They were getting small business loans from U.S. taxpayer money, and they were like, "Yeah, we're proud of it." And
it'd be one thing if we weren't on the borderline of bankruptcy or default, on our debt, and we were swimming in cash, and all our other domestic needs were being met. It'd be one thing, but it's not where we're at right now.
yeah.
Anyway, and again, I keep harking back to, it's not like this should be unexpected. I mean, the man campaigned on these things. He said this is what he was going to do. The people voted for him, so he's doing it. How can we criticize a politician that's actually making good on the promises? Right, the promises made, promises kept. You may not like it, but
And can we briefly just touch on the tariff conversation? I know you and I have talked about this. A lot of people said that in 2016 he used tariffs to negotiate, and he did. And there were some tariffs he put in, especially in regards to China, that, from what I can tell, didn't raise anybody's prices and were so good, Biden left him in.
right,
Right.
that's all right.
So here he comes now. Here he's, and I saw that.
But every conversation right now, and I've been involved in several of them as on behalf of the association, is how these tariffs are going to negatively impact the country, our industry, our members, et cetera. And this is not right. I think we've talked about this in previous podcasts. This is not hypothetical. I mean, we have experience. He did this before. And then the other thing that's really amazing this time around is you think his critics would learn to just slow their roll, because by the time before their criticism can even be published, it's actually had the impact it was intended to have. He's either rolling it back or or postponing it temporarily.
My favorite is, Mexico or Canada was already going to do this, so it's nothing new.
Yeah, that's
so
the
Trump
big.
didn't win.
That's
right?
the big whatever the
epiphany that
spin.
they had. Yeah,
Right now is that all this stuff was
it was already in the books.
yeah.
Right. If it was already in the books, why didn't they do it over the last 4 years?
Exactly.
Right. Why is so much fentanyl coming across the border? Like it's insane to me because it's like the last
You have
4
to be
years didn't
I
happen.
don't know. I mean, this is going to sound harsh. You got to be a special kind of dumb. I mean, seriously, to sit there and buy those kind of arguments. It was already in the books, to your point, but we never implemented it. We never did anything about it.
It's in the books, but
all these 10,000 troops in Mexico are on the books, but they were still flying across the border. You've seen the chart, right? Between like the day of inauguration, how it went from here to here.
Yeah. I read somewhere there's been a 93% drop in border crossings in 3 weeks.
Yeah. And again, we kind of opened the show with how exciting these times are for I think most Americans who agree with these common sense policies.
I'm sorry, I gotta interrupt you. I cannot stop laughing on Phil Murphy, the governor of New Jersey. Right? He's at some forum, and he's talking about how in his sphere, that's how he described it, there's an illegal alien. And that illegal alien is living.
And his wife thought, well, let's just help him out.
Let's just help him out. But this person's living above their garage,
right,
in some apartment above his garage.
Yeah, but that's in keeping in long-standing tradition of Democrats with their undocumented housekeeper help,
who's probably being paid under market rates,
yes,
right?
Exactly,
but that's a different conversation. Mm-hmm. And then he was like, and if the feds want to come and get him, like you're gonna have to go through me or something like that. Machismo type thing. And then Tom Holman says, I can go and arrest you, right? And the governor's office was like, oh, no, he misspoke. There's nobody there.
Misspoke. So to be fair, though, because this issue, certainly does probably have implications in our country. I've never taken anything Trump has said or me personally, my beliefs on immigration, which I've always been a pro-legal immigration person. When people through centuries wanted to immigrate to this country because they saw it as a land of opportunity and a land where if they worked hard, their dreams were their limits. But it was done through a process. It was done. We talked about this, I think, in past shows too. I feel strongly that the volume of that has to be at a pace to where those immigrants can assimilate into the American culture and all the values. When it happens too fast, you miss that assimilation. It can't happen fast enough. Yeah. And now we have people that are coming, not necessarily, it seems, to better themselves through hard work.
Exactly. You can't even accept the premise that this is the traditional reason behind the immigration.
So, I believe Trump. I believe, every Republican in my adult political life who's ever said they wanted limits on illegal immigration has always been pro-legal immigration. Yeah. And I think even now we can hope out of this administration for at some point, once we get the really dangerous people, out of the country, that there also should be a good way for people who have maybe been here illegal for a long time, but have kept their nose clean, have worked for decades, a way of normalizing their immigration status, and I think we do that, by the way. That's never talked about in any of these conversations. There's probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people a year that legally are entered into the country, are allowed to work, that normalize their immigration status as either permanent residents or green card holders or whatnot. Yeah. I mean, it happens all the time. All the time. So yes, we need to continue to support that. But I think the side that's getting the most attention now is, we've had literally how many? It's a little bit disputed whether it's 10 to upwards of 20 million.
I've heard 10 to 12 million consistently from people.
Any event. I just wanted to comment that because there's no doubt there are people in the food industry, ag culture, construction that probably that we know are here illegally.
Yeah.
But I think there's a balance between what's being done right now between the people that are true dangers to our society that came over with criminal records and.
All right, I'm going to make one last point about immigration, and then we need to kind of wrap up because Mr. Producer's letting me know. How can this one side before pro illegal immigration, which we all know drives down labor costs,
Sure.
and then turn around and also claim that they're for the working man,
Can't.
whose wages that are being lowered by.
They can't without the help of the legacy or lamestream media. There's just no way.
Yeah,
They can't.
it's fascinating to me because I'm like,
Well, they have
Yeah.
for many, many years, but that's what's really changing, I think, in the media sphere, these
Yeah.
days, and why they hate the social media and the World Wide
podcasts.
Web and the podcast and things so much is because these are ways around the legacy media that's had a grip on the messaging for decades and decades.
Right.
So anyway, I think that understanding is coming to an end. People realize you can't be for both of those things simultaneously.
and I think we as consumers of information, we need to pay attention to when people talk out of both sides of their mouth, because that triggers me, and I hate that word trigger too. I get triggered by the word trigger, but that's a different conversation. But I get really upset when people talk out of both sides of their mouth and nobody calls them out on it, right? Like, I'm like, okay, so you're going to bring in 8 to 12 million people. What do you think will happen to labor costs?
Right. And I think I've said this either in conversations with you. I don't know if we've touched on it in podcasts, but the last 4 years have been the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
They had no restrictions and let in everybody they wanted to, and they gave none of them work permits.
Yep.
So do one or the other. Either keep them out or let them in and give them work permits.
the opportunity to
But
earn.
the past administration did the worst of both worlds. Let them in, give them no work permits. So they're automatically on day one, whether it's 10 million or 20, we're part of a shadow economy. And to your point, you can't be for the working class and for that kind of policy at the same time. So,
Well, listen, kudos to the governor of Texas who started putting them on buses and sent them all over the country.
yeah,
I think
our governor did too.
Our governor did too. This issue would
All
not
of a
have
sudden,
happened
these
if
sanctuary cities, Martha's Vineyard and different other places, were not so open to immigrants.
Martha's Vineyard, it took them I think less than 24 hours to
Yes.
get them off the island.
Yes, yes.
They were like,
So, and I want to close with just a little cautionary tale. We in Florida right now, and in recent weeks, have had this odd legislative struggle with the governor and the legislature, both of which are Republican, right?
Yep.
If they can't get their act together, they're going to be in a minority party. There's no guarantee that in the state of Florida that's always going to be controlled by the Republicans. And if they can't get their act together behind something that unifies most Republican voters, I'd say most American voters, there's no telling what kind of consequences are going to result.
yeah, they need to pay attention to.
They really do.
that for sure.
They really do. So anyway, another great. Thanks for.
Enjoyed that.
So thank you all for listening and for honoring us with your time. We look forward to sharing another episode very soon with you. So stay tuned and thank you for listening.
And for comments, send us an email at theobvious@abceastflorida.com.
Ciao.